Good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball, and it's an honor to be your MC today. I will keep my remarks to a minimum, as our guest is very dynamic. We have an outstanding reader, so anything I will say will pale in comparison to the information that they can give you today. But you do rely on me for a couple of things here. You rely on me for your weekly sports update. How about those Oregon Ducks, 13-0? For the first time in school history, and the champions of the Big Ten. Now, college football, like America, has gotten very weird. Who could have predicted 10 years ago that the Oregon Ducks would be a champion of the Big Ten? It's almost as likely as Donald Trump becoming a two-term president. Our world is just getting very, very weird. And a final piece of weirdness. Who could have predicted 10 years ago that the Alabama Crimson Tide would be left out of a 12-team college football playoff? Unbelievable. SMU took their place, which from a football perspective may be better. I like the underdog, but from our topic's perspective, probably bad. Maybe we should want Alabama in there. Our presenter may have some commentary about that. We'll see. A reminder that humanism is a rational philosophy informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. It advocates the extension of participatory democracy and the expansion of an open society standing for human rights and social justice. Our reader this morning has done so much for our organization, especially on the scholarship committee. Please welcome Kathy Humble.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Good. I'm going to read a piece by Canadian writer Margaret Atwood, author of The Handmaid's Tale. This is from Good Bones and Simple Murders, a collection of stories and essays. It's called We Want It All. This is the book. What we want, of course, is the same old story. The trees pushing out their leaves, fluttering them, shucking them off, the water thrashing around in the oceans, the tweedling of the birds, the unfurling of the slugs, the worms vacuuming dirt, the zinnias and their pungent, slow explosions. We want it all to go on and go on again, the same thing each year, monotonous and amazing, just as if we were still behaving ourselves, living in tents, raising sheep, slitting their throats for God's benefit, refusing to invent plastics. For unbelief in bathrooms, you pay a price. If apples were the devil's only bait, we'd still be able to call our souls our own. But then he threw indoor plumbing into the bargain, and we were doomed. Now we use up a lot of paper telling one another how to conserve paper, and the sea fills up with killer coffee cups, and we worry about the sun and its ambivalent rays. When will it all cave in? The sky, I mean, our networks, our intricate pretensions. We were too good at what we did, at being fruitful and multiplying, and now there's too much breathing. We eat dangerous foods. The cells of our bodies turn on us like sharks. Every system is self-limiting. Will we solve ourselves as the rats do, with war, with plagues, with mass starvation? These thoughts come with breakfast like the juice from murdered fruits. Your depression, my friend, is the revenge of the oranges. But we still find the world astounding. We can't get enough of it. Even as it shrivels, even as its many lights flicker and are extinguished, the tigers, the leopard frogs, the plunging dolphin flukes, flicker and are extinguished by us, we gaze and gaze. Where do you draw the line between love and greed? We never did know. We always wanted more. We want to take it all in for one last time. We want to eat the world with our eyes. That's it.
Thank you, Kathy, for a fun and dynamic reading. As of this morning, we have an open reading spot for next week. So for those of you that might have a reading in mind, you can go to our website and sign up to be next week's reader. Our presenter this morning has written over 30 books, including The Universal University, Notes from the Greatest Classroom, and Meditations of John Muir. Chris Highland is a former Presbyterian minister, now a humanist freethinker. He will speak on the Christian Nationalist Crusade, whose goal is to take America back for God. He will provide an overview of who is leading this crusade and which organizations are challenging their agenda. Chris is a teacher and writer who lives in Western North Carolina. His Asheville community was greatly affected by Hurricane Helene, but he was lucky to be not too affected. He and his wife enjoy hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and you can see a beautiful picture of the Blue Ridge Mountains in his Zoom background. Let's have a rousing ovation from our live audience at the Friendly House and a warm yet muted welcome from our Zoom audience for Chris Highland.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd, for that enthusiastic introduction. I'm not sure I've been invited and introduced that way before. So that's very nice. Well, it's good to be with you all on screen across the country today. And I want to make sure you can all hear me well and see me well. So, so far, I guess we're okay.
We gotcha.
Good, good. Well, I have family in the Portland area. I was telling Todd earlier, and I was born in Seattle, so I have a little bit of Northwest in my blood. In fact, a whole bunch. Doing this today makes me a little homesick for the Pacific Northwest, but I think that my roots there give me a firm grounding for presenting this subject today. I wish it was a happy subject. I wish it would, help us to all leave today with hope and joy and really a view to the future that we can all be pleased about and content about. But unfortunately, we have to get through a period of time here. And who better to do that but humanists, free thinkers, people who are open to learning and growing. So what I wanted to say is that I think I have a firm grounding to present this subject because I was a campus crusader for Christ in the Seattle area. And I went to a high school where we had Bible as literature in the school. And then I went on to study religion at Seattle Pacific University, which is an evangelical school in Seattle, as you probably know. Later, I went to seminary in the San Francisco Bay Area. And all of that really helped me gain a pretty clear perspective of all the different Christianist agendas around. From most extreme, when I was a Presbyterian minister, and my chaplaincy work as an interfaith chaplain in the Bay Area really was focused more on progressive and inclusive work with people in need. So that really helped me in my own trajectory, in my emergence from that narrow kind of view that said, I want the whole world to believe like me, that kind of thinking, to a little more inclusive, pluralistic, and humanistic viewpoint. So that's what brings me to be with you today. I'd like to begin with one of my favorite quotes from Jefferson. Jefferson's got a pretty bad rap these days, but he said some good things. I think he did some good things too, with his blind spots. He gave us a kind of rule of reason, and he wrote this: the legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only as are injurious to others. Government should get involved if actions are causing injuries to other people. But he continues with this: it does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. I love that quote. If it doesn't cause injury, who cares what someone believes? That's the rub, though, isn't it? The crusade for Christian supremacy injures democracy, and it picks the public pocket, and it fractures the body of we the people. So how does that crusade injure democracy? It doesn't believe in democracy, for first thing, or it doesn't believe in true religious liberty. though they talk about it a lot. Separation of religion and state's a myth to these people. How does it pick the public pocket? Well, just look at the best example is the way public funds are being taken from public schools for school choice, so-called religious school vouchers. How does it fracture the body of the nation? It's all about breaking us up, dividing us, sheep from the goats, God's side waging war against Satan's side. And sorry to break the news, but most of us are probably on Satan's side for these people. So they want one nation divided under God. And I don't think that's really what most of us want. So I'd like to introduce you to several voices in Christian nationalism today and who are really interested in Christian supremacy. But first, I think it's probably good to give you a quick thumbnail of what I mean by Christian nationalism. And there are different ways of framing it that are pretty similar. You may have read people like Catherine Stewart, Amanda Tyler, Andrew Whitehead, Matthew Taylor, Kristen Dumez, and others who have similar definitions. So here we go. Christian nationalism is a hyper-politicized extremist ideology. That's a mouthful. And it twists one radical offshoot of Christianism into a kind of worship of Americanism, right? So you get Christianism and Americanism melded together, twisted together. And this is often summed up pretty neatly by the Christian nationalists. They just say faith, family, and freedom. See how easy that is? Faith, family, and freedom. So they wave the flags, they sing God Bless America while they're holding up the Bible and the cross of Christ, wanting to push their views on all of us. Well, just think of January 6th. And you got a kind of a good picture of what Christian nationalism is doing right now. That's just a thumbnail sketch. So someone I want to introduce you to first is Ralph Drollinger. And Ralph Drollinger is a name that you might want to know at some point. He's a former NBA player, speaking of sports, Todd. So he kind of washed out of the NBA a number of years ago. And then he became director of something called Capital Ministries. So look him up, Capital Ministries. Did you know that there are regular Bible studies in Congress and the White House? Well, Drollinger and his staff are the ones who are leading those. They're teaching their versions of the Bible and biblical principles in the seat of power, right in the seat of power. But not only in Washington, D.C., they're getting into town halls and state houses all across the country. And Capital Ministries doesn't hide the fact that they want to take over. They want to train people to take over all levels of government because their mission is clearly stated in Drollinger's own book. He has a book that I've read called Rebuilding America, the Biblical Blueprint. That title pretty much summarizes the whole agenda of Christian supremacy. Rebuild the nation with the biblical blueprint, whatever that is. God's plan, God's nation. See, it's logical, isn't it? Well, that's the theological framework. If you've heard of Project 2025, that's their theological framework. That's their blueprint. It's at least part of it. Let me say it clearly here, and I'm sorry to give you depressing news, but these people are taking over the government right now, right before our eyes. And I'm not exaggerating, and I'm not joking. The Speaker of the House is a white Christian nationalist. The majority of the Supreme Court is white Christian nationalists. Many in Congress are full out Christian nationalists, or at the very least, sympathizers and enablers. Well, a lot of these people in God has chosen the next president, the MAGA Messiah. And, he's the one who sells Bibles, and he refers to his cult disciples as my beautiful Christians. Remember that? He actually said that on the campaign trail, calling a group my beautiful Christians. Well, one of his beautiful Christians is the mega church, or we could say MAGA church pastor, Robert Jeffers in Texas. And Jeffers even published a book that has a real surprising title, America is a Christian Nation. Okay, that pretty much says it, doesn't it? It's pretty clear. So more and more we hear how proud these folks are to call themselves Christian nationalists. Remember when MTG and Boebert have made those comments about being Christian nationalists? They're very proud of it. Very proud of it. So let me say right now, the vast majority of these folks are white, which is why so many critics call it more accurately white Christian nationalism. And no surprise, predominantly led by white men, white guys. Now, here's the thing to remember. This is the simple way to think of Christian nationalism and Christian supremacy. They generally believe in three things. Number one, America was founded as a Christian nation. Of course, we all know that, right? Somehow by evangelical Christians. Well, that's not true, but that's what they believe. Second, America is now, presently, a Christian nation. It's just lost its way and Satan is trying to destroy it. Third, America will be a Christian nation when the extremists take over and satanic Democrats and independents and pretty much anybody who disagrees with these folks, when they're defeated, then we'll have a true Christian nation. All right, so those are three elements. There's past, present, future. Now, you may have heard of Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson isn't too far from you folks. He's the pastor of, this guy? You ought to know him because he's gaining a lot of influence. He's a small town guy, but he has wide influence through his college and his connection to something he calls classical Christian schools across the country. And like many of these folks, he has lots of YouTube videos, and he loves to hear himself speak for God and tell his flock what God wants for America. Well, this relates to one of the most insidious aspects to the crusade for Christian supremacy, the destruction of public schools. Now, that sounds pretty radical, doesn't it? Maybe because it is. Destruction of public schools in favor of public support for private religious schools. This, as I mentioned earlier, the school choice voucher programs. Now, I take this very seriously as an educator and a writer. I think it's very important to address this particular issue, perhaps first and foremost. Here in North Carolina, the legislature gives hundreds of millions of dollars to something they euphemistically refer to as opportunity scholarships. Opportunity scholarships. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, most of that money from taxpayers goes to religious schools, conservative Christian schools primarily. I urge you to do the research. How much of your money is going to these kinds of schools in Oregon? We hear school choice and parents' rights, which often simply mean people want to take money from the public educational system that's open to every child and hand over that money to faith schools, to their little Christian kids, for their education. No doubt you know about this group. It's called Let Them Learn Oregon. Have you heard of them? Let Them Learn Oregon. This group that claims on their website that Oregon families want school choice. They're speaking for you. Oregon families want school choice, they claim. That's, let me just say on the side here that a lot of Christian supremacists, they speak as if they speak for everybody. Everybody needs this. Everybody wants this. This is the kind of country we want. These are the kind of neighborhoods we want, cities we want. These are the kind of leaders we want. So, but what they don't ever say is that parents, in terms of schools, parents have always had a choice, right? The question is, who pays for that choice? Sure, send your child to a private Christian school. I don't have a problem with that. The rest of us shouldn't have to pay for that any more than we should pay for Muslim parents or Buddhist parents or pagan parents to send their kids to their own sectarian schools. And I wonder sometimes whatever happened to do unto others. I taught a class a couple of years ago on this a secular view of the Sermon on the Mount. And strangely enough, all these people that want to put the Ten Commandments in schools and everywhere else, they never say, well, let's put the Sermon on the Mount. Let's frame that and put it on the wall in the school. No, they don't want to do that because it's talking about the poor and the meek and the peacemakers, and do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Well, if you're getting everybody to pay for to send your kids to your own private schools to teach them about your narrow view of religion, don't you think that you should allow other people to do that? And you want to pay for them to do the same thing? No, they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. So keep an eye on what's happening in the schools because they are the lightning rod. And a lot of these people are real clear about it in their writings and in their preaching. But they want to go for the schools first. Get into the schools, take over the school boards, whatever you can do because kids are being indoctrinated, right? So what do we want to do? Well, we want to indoctrinate them. I mean, we can maybe see right through that, but unfortunately, a lot of people aren't paying attention enough to see through it. Speaking of schools, on college campuses, keep an eye out for something called Turning Point. Maybe you've heard of them. Turning Point USA is one political group, and a spinoff is called Turning Point Faith, right? They're into the churches. They're organizing churches, and believe me, they're good organizers. They put on a big show too. You can watch them on YouTube. Turning Point Faith. And the name to know is Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk. Another of the smug and self-righteous MAGA stars who fires up younger people to fuse their piety and their patriotism. And I think, there's a lot of cancel culture going on with them. They talk about it a lot, but what do? They love to whine about the woke libs. And they shout down anybody who challenges their proud Christian nationalism. I mean, they're canceling people all over the place, but they whine about that happening to them. Well, no surprise, Charlie Kirk kisses the feet of the MAGA Messiah, like all the rest of them. I mean, that's the time we're living in. So across this educational whiteboard kind of situation here, Christian nationalism poses danger to our secular, pluralistic democracy. And where do these folks get their knowledge of history to, the past, present, future stuff? Where do they get all that stuff? Well, a lot of them get it from their favorite historian, David Barton. If you don't know David Barton, he's, at least watch one of his videos. Anyway, he's not really a historian. He's not trained as a historian, but he is the guy that millions of these people go to. He has hundreds of videos that prove that America was founded as a Christian nation. If you doubt it, watch one of his videos. He's quoting all his founders and all these different people to prove his point. Just watch some of his videos. He's a fast-talking preacher type who throws out handfuls of cherry-picked quotes from the founders to prove his point. One of his lies, and I might as well just call it what it is, one of his lies is that the Supreme Court, through prayer and the Bible, and somehow expelled God from the schools in the 1960s. You ever heard somebody say that before? It's a favorite claim of the followers of this mentality and this guy. Well, he fails the exam, doesn't he? He fails the exam. The Supreme Court never did that. Can't have officially led prayers. You can't have official Bible reading, but you can't stop people from praying, at least quietly and not distracting from the educational process. So anyway, that's one of his big lies that goes around and around and around. So this brings us to, unfortunately, to the Supreme Court. And this is where it gets really serious. Well, I think this is an arrogant thing to say, but I think that we could all teach the justices of the Supreme Court a few things about this thing called religious freedom. The majority seems blinded to the fact that one religion, especially one extremist form of one religion, cannot be established by law under the Constitution. And they seem to skip right over the no establishment clause in favor of the free expression clause. Oh yeah, you're free to express religion any way you want to, even if you want to take over the government. Well, they're privileging one militant form of Christianity that's gaslighted the court into thinking Christians are being persecuted in the United States. That's another lie that's going around and around and around. Well, not only is this blatantly false, but this claim of victimhood is almost laughable, isn't it? With the power that Christianity has in this nation. Consider the fact that about 90% of representatives in Congress identify as Christian, about 90%. And there's only one representative, I hope you know his name, there's only one representative who identifies as a humanist, Jared Huffman from California, my former congressman in California, Jared Huffman. Okay, I'm going to give you one more influential voice in Christian supremacy, because I could go on and on. But his name is Lance Wallnau. Lance Wallnau. And Lance Wallnau is a salesman first. He's an entrepreneur. He's always selling something, like a lot of the TV preachers. Lance Wallnau is a Texas preacher, but he's really a salesman and entrepreneur. But here's the insidious thing. He's one of these self-proclaimed prophets, a leader in something called the New Apostolic Reformation, the NAR, the New Apostolic Reformation. Now, if this, I grew up, I was an evangelical for a period of time in my youth and emerged from Christianity over the years, but I still remember that mentality. And we looked to people who were speaking for God. And these people are very, very clear that they do. They speak for God. Actually, with this new administration coming in, they're going to have a field day. They already are. The new apostolic reformation, the new prophets, the new apostles leading the way. They think that they have a direct line to the Almighty, and their mission is to seize and dominate the 7 mountains of culture: government, education, media, family, religion, and more. They want to dominate all of these power mountains in our culture, right? And he and his team of prophets and apostles, they want power. They want influence. They want to rule over each realm and every mountain. Lance Wallnau came out with a book a few years ago called Invading Babylon, the Seven Mountain Mandate. So they feel that they have a mandate from God to take all those mountains, take the mountains. And the very first one is government. Take the government. And they're doing it. Yeah, they're doing it right now. One of the founders of that particular Apostolic Reformation, C. Peter Wagner. C. Peter Wagner. He had a book out a number of years ago. He's gone now, but this will give you an idea of what they're after. Dominion. You know, his book is called Dominion: How Kingdom Action Can Change the World. All right. There's another one by a guy named Torba. There's a conservative guy who's been around for a while. Here's a book, kind of a scary looking like the Crusade book or something, that's called A Biblical Guide to Taking Dominion and Discipling Nations. So they're not hiding it. Nobody's hiding this stuff. They want dominion, and they're doing it in the name of God. Okay? So this is why these new apostles talk a lot about spiritual warfare. And that's a subject for another time. It's a big subject. But Wallnau is one of the people that really pushes that. Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn, he's traveling around the country with his Reawaken America tour. And that's one of his big things, is that we're in a spiritual warfare time. And once again, if you want to see what spiritual warfare means, look at January 6th. Because it's not just something up there. It's not just some people aren't just praying about this stuff in their church. You know, this is stuff that's actively in our culture, actively seeking dominion right now. And they are succeeding. So I don't have time to introduce more voices of white Christian nationalism right now, but I'm sure you're interested in knowing, help, what do we do? What do we do? Who's pushing back? Where can we join to do something about this anti-democratic power grab? Well, I mentioned Representative Jared Huffman, and he and Jamie Raskin, a representative from Maryland, I'm sure you know him, they formed the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. And look them up too. I mean, look up all these people, but you know, if you're taking notes, the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. And they have over 20 members now. That's small in Congress, but they're regularly exposing Christian nationalism while emphasizing things like science, critical thinking, religious freedom, those kinds of things. So thank goodness that the Congressional Free Thought Caucus is active in our Congress. And we could hope that they would balance a little the activities of the Congressional Prayer Caucus, which has been around a long time. And they're dangerous people. They go around claiming that they're protecting the people against anti-faith, the culture of anti-faith, that everybody's out to get them, that we're all out to eliminate faith and religion. And so they're all scared. They love to play up fear. All of these people do, playing up fear. Well, they claim, the Congressional Prayer Caucus, they claim that Christians can't talk about God. You know, we just can't talk about God. We can't pray in public. You know, they won't let us pray in public or pray in schools or pray wherever we want anymore, you know, as if they ever could, but they always have done it anyway, right? So I consider this kind of BS in the name of JC. You know, it's really these kind of people are pushing a nationwide effort to put the Ten Commandments in schools, get in God we trust on everything, because we know that if you trust God, then you're going to be a trustworthy person, right? Of course. Right. So thank goodness there are voices of reason in Congress, leaders who stand up and speak out in the face of these, what I call liars for the Lord, because a lot of what they're saying, it's false. It's disinformation, misinformation, just bad stuff going on. Okay, I said I was going to focus on the good stuff. First on my list, I hope you know these people, effective challengers to religious supremacy is Americans United. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, I've been a member for a while. They are a great organization, and they're an excellent coalition that includes diverse religious representatives and free thinkers. You don't always find that, do you? We don't always find something where there's a lot of religious activity and participation and a welcoming and a collegial feeling that, okay, non-religious people are also welcome and non-religious people are also leading the way. So they have a team of lawyers and lobbyists who are pushing for inclusive politics and defending this thing called the wall of separation. Now, of course, as you know, the American Humanist Association, of course, is actively standing for secular values alongside the Freedom from Religion Foundation and other groups. I'm a member of these myself, and I'm a humanist celebrant. So I'm connected to the humanist movement. And in my view, and this might be controversial, and I'm fine getting some pushback on this, I support these organizations if they are open to working alongside people of faith who are also alarmed by white Christian nationalism. I think they serve a good practical purpose. If these organizations can work together and are not just so anti-religious that they can't stand to be in the same room, let alone work with people that are working on the same things, we really need people who can collaborate. So I also want to call attention to something. I've been reading a lot of books that are written by Christians, but they're Christians who are pushing back on Christian nationalism, and that has to happen. More of that has to happen. Within Christianity, we need to see more people standing up and saying, no, that's not the way it should be. That's not really Christianity in a way. Okay, so one of the people I go to is Amanda Tyler, and Amanda Tyler is started something a few years ago called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. There you go, pretty clear. Christians Against Christian Nationalism. She's a strong voice. She's a very strong voice. This book just came out, How to End Christian Nationalism. How to End Christian Nationalism. Now, here's the thing. Now, I don't really mind reading books and stuff about Christians, and my wife is a Christian minister still. I left, but I'm not anti-religious. I have a lot of criticisms, and I'm writing about it and speaking about it all the time. But we've got to be able to work together and be in communication and form coalitions with some of these kinds of people who are doing this, and they're really saying the same kind of thing from their Christian perspective. So Amanda Tyler, she's a good one to look up because she's also a member of a Baptist group that works for true religious liberty. And as you might or might not know, historically, Baptists have been among the strongest supporters of the separation of religion and state. Yeah, the Baptists. And I'm not talking about Southern Baptists. I'm talking about historically knowledgeable Baptists. And that's partly due, Baptists have always felt this way, at least historically, because they were excluded in the early American colonies. They were the heretics. And they were afraid that the Anglicans and the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists, other Christians, would keep them from equal rights in their new colonies, their new nation. In the Rhode Island colony, Roger Williams, one of their preachers, he spoke of the hedge separating the church and the government. A hedge, something growing, something living. And of course, Jefferson picked up on that later when he talked about a wall of separation. I call it a living wall. And so did Roger Williams. He thought of it as a hedge, a living wall. And I think in some ways, we are that wall. We have to help protect and say, okay, you religious folks, you can participate in it all. You can be leaders too, but you can't impose your religion on the rest of us. That doesn't work in a free, democratic, pluralistic society with a secular constitution. Okay, I'll just mention a few more. Interfaith Alliance, Interfaith America. And I mention these interfaith organizations, which some people go, and I get a lot of pushback from some atheists who say, no, we can't, I'm not going to get involved with something that has the word faith in it. It's not including me. Well, what I have experienced is that you get involved with these organizations, you tend to be around a lot of more progressive thinking people, and we end up being the ones who can help educate and say, humanists aren't so bad, And maybe at some point we could change the name so it's not interfaith anymore, it's inter something else, or it's just a coalition. So I just mentioned them because I think they're doing a lot of good work. Interfaith Alliance, Interfaith America. What more can I say? I want to just throw out a question. Who are the most needed voices to stand up to white Christian nationalistic supremacy? Who are the people who need to defend the wall the most right now? Well, I've been mentioning a few: Americans United, Amanda Taylor's group, these interfaith groups, American Humanists, Freedom from Religion, all these different good groups. But who are the most needed voices? Well, I think it's you. And I think it's me. I think it starts with the humanists. It starts with the free thinkers. It starts with people who may not even like those labels, don't want any of those labels except, well, I just want to live peacefully in community, and I also want to see progress in our society, and I don't want to be held back. I don't want us to be held back by ideologies that are extreme and want to impose those ideologies on everybody else. I want to work with people. And that's humanism, right? That's the heart of humanism, is to say, you're a human being, I'm a human being, let's figure this out together. And if you don't listen to me, if you don't want to listen or cooperate, then we've got a problem. And we've got to figure out how to do this democracy thing. So educating ourselves, doing what we're doing right now, educating ourselves, staying vigilant, speaking out when we see attempts at some of these folks trying to take over school boards or town councils or the legislature, the courts, the higher levels of government. Didn't work too well this last election, did it? We didn't stop them. We didn't stop them. And you know what? It's the box has been blown open now. So we're going to see a lot more of this stuff going on. I'm about to wrap up here pretty soon. It means we have to partner with people who we may not always agree with. And maybe it's uncomfortable for us sometimes. As I said, with these interfaith groups and other coalitions, it's not going to be easy. But I think it's critically important that we understand something. As I see it, a majority of religious people in the country are really with us on this. Even if they believe that, oh yeah, we were founded as a Christian country, they may actually realize now that, well, yeah, but we've changed. We've grown up a little. We've evolved. And so now we're not just run by, you know, a certain mentality or any kind of certain religion kind of in our heads, but we are more inclusive now. We're way more diverse than we have ever been before. So those folks are with us. And the question is, are we going to be with them? Are we willing to be with them? We're willing to join forces with the progressive congregations and interfaith organizations and groups like Americans United and stand toe to toe and eye to eye with the supremacists to show we're united in our shared belief the United States of America is not beholden to one party or one religion or one person, but to the fundamental principles of a representative democracy that are ordained. Did you know that our democracy, our Constitution, was ordained? And these folks would love to pick up on that and say, oh yeah, it's ordained, it's ordained. Read the preamble to the Constitution. We the people do ordain. Doesn't mention God. So, I mean, I was ordained as a minister years ago, so I know what ordination means. I know what it means to ordain something. So the founders were smart enough to say, we the people do ordain and establish the Constitution. I think we need to remind people of that all the time. And I think that humanists, free thinkers, agnostics, atheists have a critical role to play in the battle of reason over religious domination. These people want to do their dominion thing, you know? We need to say, no, no, you don't get it. You don't get dominion. So let me repeat something here at the end. We're not saying that most Christians are supremacists. What we're talking about today is an extremist, politicized ideology that uses Christian rhetoric and bizarre marginal beliefs, because a lot of them are very bizarre. They use those to assert their quest for political power, to seize those 7 mountains, the 7-mountain mandate. They want to seize those mountains. They want to seize those mountains. You know, the mountains around us, the mountains of power. They want to take it. They want to take it. They want the whole world. They don't want just America. They want the whole world to take their country for themselves. And my question is, I know the answer already, are we going to let them? Are we going to let these people do this? So what are we going to do about it? So I look forward to hearing what your comments and questions are. I know I'm talking a lot here, and there's so much more I can say because I've taught 8-week classes on this stuff and given a lecture not too long ago at a local synagogue, a public lecture on this subject. So I know it's a hot topic and people get hot about it. So go for it. What do you have to say?
Thank you, Chris. That was a wonderful, thought-provoking, somewhat fearful presentation, but there was some optimism in there as well, and we appreciate that. And I think that you gave us something real to think about and kind of a call to action. I've always believed that there was a role for humanism within what I would call people who are politely religious. So, I appreciate that call to action and giving us that thought. I have one question from chat so far from Hank Robb that I'll get to momentarily, but traditionally I, as the MC, start with the first question as we get our questions together. And I want to go back to what you've said about education in your presentation. To me, this could be one of the real pillars of what the Trump administration and Christian nationalists are trying to destroy. It's mentioned in Project 2025 very prominently. given the Secretary of Education's background, that's not great for traditional roles of the Department of Education. So my question to you is, how do you view the first days or first priorities of the Trump administration? What will we see with the Department of Education in the early part of his term?
I don't know if I can even come close to answering that, because uh, um, these folks have published a lot of these things, and there's Project 2025, and there's a lot of these other things. You can read these books and about what they think of public education and the whole thing. But I think there's a track record that's they're just going to carry it forward and amp it up. And that track record is, as I mentioned, um, grassroots stuff. And they're very well organized. And so it's like the more they can take over a school board, the more they can influence what's going on in the classrooms, what teachers can teach and what they can't teach. And can we put the Ten Commandments on the wall, and then, or in a place like Texas or Louisiana, you say, okay, we're going to have a Bible reading now, or Oklahoma, we're going to. So I think that it's going to be just raised to another level, to where they're going to try to impose this across the country in a lot of other places. So yeah, they talk about destroying, throwing out the Department of Education. Well, I'll give you a hopeful sign. We had, in the last election, we had a person running for superintendent of public instruction here in North Carolina, and she was calling to abolish that department, but she was running for superintendent of public instruction. Thank goodness she lost. That's a victory. That's a little victory. And, North Carolina, in terms of politics, here we are, we're very kind of a purple state. And sure, it went to Trump for the president, but we elected a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor and attorney general, and down ballot stuff. There was a lot of good things that happened. So they can try to do that and whatever they want to do. But, I mean, will it be as bad as when Betsy DeVos was in there? I don't know. Maybe worse. I mean, they put people in charge of things they have, like, as you say, no experience. Come on.
And I meant to mention, the audience knows that I often use humor in times of absurdity. I feel like Trump missed an opportunity. I expect Lance Wallnau to be part of the administration.
Yeah, right. Well, the last time around, he gave Paula White, who's one of these same people. She's one of the apostles. She's one of the prophets. She feels like she's right there with Lance Wallnau. She had an office in the White House, so I don't doubt they're gonna. We're gonna see total craziness. That's my view. And that doesn't take much thought to come up with that one.
I overlooked one question in the chat that happened before Hank Robb, so I'll get to that one first. Kathy Humble is talking about the white Christian national voices, and she asks, do these various influential voices compete with each other for followers and dominance? How does that play out?
Well, I suppose there's some competition going on, but I mentioned the New Apostolic Reformation people, and there are hundreds of them around the world, and they're pretty coordinated. And I get a kick out of reading about them from their point of view. I was reading some of that this morning. That these are the kind of guys, mostly men, but there are women too. But they love to pat each other on the back, and they say, well, yeah, I affirm that you're a prophet. And then they turn around and say, well, I affirm that you're a prophet, because they're getting the voice of God, so they can say that. They can say these things. And so I don't know about the competition. I think I mean, they're in competition with the greatest Bible salesman that we have right now, with go to the MAGA Messiah, who is sells Bibles and guitars and a bunch of stuff. So he's the mega salesman right now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't see a lot of competition. I think they're all kind of they're the stars on the stage right now.
Don't forget the digital trading cards. I think that's his best item, with him as a cowboy and an astronaut.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, he knows how to make money and lose money too.
I'll get to our live audience momentarily. The questions keep popping up there. Whoa, somebody asked a long question, which ruined my chat here. 1 second. We will get to Hank Robb's question before we get to our live audience. Hank asks, why do you think we refer to individuals as people of faith when their faith is in some form of supernaturalism, while those whose faith is in naturalism are not called people of faith?
I don't know about that. I mean, faith is one of those slippery words. It's kind of like a religion or God or spirit or you name it, any of those kind of supernaturalistic things. I don't know. I'm not sure where you're coming from on that one, but I think that, it's normally associated with the natural. There's always a supernatural dimension to it. So I don't know exactly what that means.
Hank, you're on screen. Would you like to ask a clarifying question?
Yes. When I was young, I was taught that faith is the belief in things unseen.
Yeah.
So if you have a child and start a college fund, that's the belief in things unseen. You don't know if your kid is going to be alive at college or if they will go to college. So we do lots of, I mean, I don't understand how people could get up and have their clothes laid out the next day. That's an act of faith.
Okay.
You haven't seen the next day yet.
Yeah.
So
Well,
why is this exclusive use of a clear word that means it's not here now, but you believe it's coming?
Yeah.
Only exclusively used with people who believe in supernatural things are coming.
Okay, I get where you're coming from. Yeah, it's just a different, it's another one of the definitions of faith. It's just like, faith is either, something like you're trusting that you're hoping, you're trusting, you're planning that something good will happen in the future. Yeah, that's one understanding of faith. But what we're talking about here is certainly, this is all supernaturalistic stuff that they're doing. And the problem with that is they're trying to impose that worldview on the real world, and we're seeing the results of that, the consequences of that.
Let's go to our live audience at the Friendly House for question number 1.
That's me.
Okay, go ahead. Is that Ann?
That's me. Yeah, that's Ann. I'd like to ask, I've been doing the Facebook posts for the humanist group here, and I've noticed in things that I post, the fact that that there are all kinds of religions and people of non-religious and all that, and how can we come together? And what I'm getting from the comments is a lot of folks that believe they're on it because they believe in humanism, but or at least atheism. They have a real problem with people of faith, and they cannot get to being in a room with them, having a decent conversation with them, anything like that. Would you suggest I do to not alleviate or but make them kind of see my way, or what do you think?
Well, if you come up with that one, let me know. Um, well, I don't know. A lot of this comes down to experience because I get into little verbal wrestling matches sometimes with some of the ardent militant atheists who are very anti-faith,
Yeah.
anti-religious, and I get it. I have a lot of the same criticisms, but it just seems to be counterproductive to get into those wrestling matches just for the sake of wrestling. And if we're ever going to get anywhere or do anything, uh, why not? Why don't we connect with people who, are focused on the same kinds of things? I mean, for many years, I was an interfaith chaplain, as I said, and we had people of all different kinds of religion and no religion who were focused on things like, okay, how are we going to run a shelter? So they hired me to direct a shelter, a winter emergency shelter. And, other people got together and said, well, we need housing for seniors. We need affordable housing for seniors. They hired me to be a manager of that kind of thing. So, you know, they were cooperating to do something, to accomplish, to be constructive, to collaborate. And if somebody they're so adamant that, well, I don't want to be around that person because they're a Catholic. I don't want to be around that person because they're this or that or whatever it is. Um, I don't have time for that. I mean, I don't have time for it anymore. It's a losing battle if somebody doesn't get it. If there's just kind of like they're in their head and it's like, well, that person believes in the supernatural and I don't. Okay, so what? If you can focus on some things together, do it. And so that's a great question. There's no trick to it. I think it comes back to experience though. If someone has never had a good experience with a person of faith, or a person in the religious community, it's kind of hard to convince them that. I mean, I'm friends with some evangelicals. It's like, oh no, evangelicals. It's like, well, so what? They're good people. The people that I know are neighbors. They're good people. They'll help me out if I need help. I help them out. And so, does it matter what they believe? On one level, yeah, it does. But most of the time, hey, humanism is about being human together, not separating people by beliefs.
Jules, I see your hand up in the Zoom. We'll get to you momentarily, but let's go to question number 2 at the friendly house.
That's me. Hope I can phrase this right. If you really want to get confident Christian nationalists, you demand that they spell out exactly what to do to people who oppose them. And I have a feeling that among their agenda is mass murder.
Oh, my geez. Hope not.
I hope not. Yeah, I hope not either. But if their present agenda doesn't turn people over to their way, assimilating into their pseudo culture, what are they going to do with those who fail or those who oppose them?
Yeah.
If you just make them spell it straight out.
Yeah.
And see Christians will want to vote for them now.
Great point. I have always thought that the best thing that we can say to these people and politicians who spout some of this stuff too, you say, what's the end game? What do you want to see in the end? How is this going to work out? Well, some of these guys, they're writing these books and stuff. They do kind of lay out some of that stuff, but they don't go that far. They would say, well, the judgment day is coming, and there'll be a time when, Jesus will come and he'll have his sword, and we'll be done with them. But they don't really spell it out because they can't. How could they possibly spell it out? The closest thing I've heard is what the MAGA Messiah has said about, well, we're going to deport all these people. We're going to get rid of them. You know, we're going to get them out of here. Well, the Christian supremacists, how would they do that? How would they start getting people out of here? You know, I mean, unless they're going to have a literal crusade, and they do see it as a kind of crusade. You know, I mean, they're not, I don't think they're going to be carrying swords, but then again, we saw January 6th, so I don't, it's a question to raise. It definitely is a question to raise. What's the end game?
Let's go to a question from our Zoom audience from Jules. Jules, come on in.
Can you hear me?
We got you. We can't see you on the screen, which is okay, but we started to hear you there. Come on.
Okay.
Oh, we got you.
Okay. So in our memory, I'm 90 years old, married 68 years. Okay. We used to get time off on Wednesday afternoons for religious study. We used to look at the Lincoln penny, and on the bottom it said, "In God we trust." We used to say, "I pledge allegiance," and they stuck it in because the original Pledge of Allegiance did not have "under God." They stuck that in. Was that the beginning of Christian nationalism? That's question one. You answer it, and then I'll have my other real question.
That's a sneaky way of doing that.
Okay.
But okay. Yeah, in my classes, I often go, you know, first class, I go back to, I go through the history and go back. And yes, the 1950s, a lot of things were happening when it really came to the surface. They're gaining power. They convinced the president, who was Eisenhower. They convinced him. Billy Graham was there. Billy Graham convinced people that we needed prayer. We needed "In God We Trust." We need, all these things were happening. One nation under God. All those kinds of things that were happening. But a lot of the writers that I've been reading recently who are analyzing this stuff, yeah, they'll go back to the 50s, but they'll say, oh, it was really Brown versus Board that really got things changed, because a lot of these religious groups did not want to integrate. So there's a racial component to it that's a very serious part of the roots of modern Christian nationalism. But it didn't start in the 1950s. It's been around since Constantine, and way, way back when people said we want a Christian world. And, you know, that's the goal of evangelicals, is not just for a Christian school or nation, but the whole world to believe like we do. So, second question, real question.
Okay. Well, to get around these major concerns, and I dwell on them more than I should, but I have family and children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. My biggest concern is climate change. Everything you're talking about is serious stuff, and it really cannot be ignored. But in the next less than 5 years, not 10, not 20, 30, in less than 5 years, we're seeing small amounts of it now. Major drought. The prediction, you know, when the scientists in the 80s said this is where we're going to be, even they're surprised at the speed in which what they predicted has happened 10 or 20 years sooner than their predictability. We're not going to make 1.5. We better work together to make 2, but this guy is going to go in the opposite direction because it's all a hoax. Are the Christian nationalists also believing that this is a hoax, when in fact we're losing the ability to grow food?
Yeah.
And the oceans are going under?
Yeah.
In terms of productivity?
Okay, let him answer your question there, Jules.
Okay.
You guessed it. You guessed it. Yeah. I think that's I mean, whatever issue, I don't care what it is, whatever issue we have that we think is serious, that affects our world, that affects our communities, our societies, Christian supremacy affects and infects all of that. Because I can still remember in the 1970s when I was one of the Jesus people, I can still remember that we were, you know, Hal Lindsey just died recently, late great Planet Earth guy. And we read those books. We thought, okay, Jesus is coming back. It's the end of the world. And we were going, hey, we're ready to go. Let's go, you know? And so it's like the world is going to hell anyway, so let's go to heaven. So that is such a dangerous, obviously dangerous ideology
Yeah.
to do that. So it completely relates to climate change. And yes, many of them do believe that's a myth. And they don't care. Why care about the environment when it's all going to be destroyed anyway? And all of us can say, well, wait a minute, you're saying that you want to take over governments and all this stuff. Why you want to do that if you're going to heaven pretty soon? They don't want to answer that question.
Well, thanks so much for your incisive. You're right on the mark.
Thank you.
They ought to clone you. You really are a great speaker. Really, really
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Let's go to question number 3 at the friendly house.
Okay. Thinking a little more on an international scale, I think my understanding is a lot of countries are a little concerned about our shenanigans, foreign policy wise, and I'm wondering if they're concerned about our Christian nationalism problem over here, that it's another concern to them, and whether there have been books produced in Europe concerning this.
Oh, well, I mean, if you look at the Humanists International and some of the, more international groups that are working on these things, yeah, I think there's a huge concern. In England, there's a society, I get their emails all the time. It's a National Secular Society in London, and they're always bringing out stuff about what's going on there. And so I think people are aware, but they're not aware enough. I mean, I said at the very beginning that I'm trying to keep up on this stuff myself because this is a mutation. It's a mutation of Christianity. It's a mutation of Americanism or patriotism, because it's not patriotism, it's nationalism. Big difference. And so it's a mutation and it keeps mutating. Just when I think I've got it down and I find that there's another voice out there. I didn't know about Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho until months ago, maybe something like last year. And turns out, here is this new star. And Charlie Kirk and some of these other people, suddenly they're on the stage. And you think, well, wait, who is this? So it's constantly changing. And I think the people in the world need to know, because you know what? Latin America, Africa, different places in the world that are struggling. It's easy for people to fall for it. They can, they get certain missionaries and preachers and evangelists go in and they say, well, if we just had Christians in power, if we just put Christians in there, then it'll all work out. It'll all be fine. God will work it out. And we know that that doesn't work, but people will fall for it.
Thank you.
Let's go to our final question, at least so far, from the friendly house. Question number 4.
Yes, I've got, it appears to me that the person who's done the most to disrupt and cause chaos amongst the Republican juggernaut in the 4 weeks since the election is Donald Trump. And that we've got to help because he can be the most disruptive force of all in throwing them in the ditch. How do we help him?
Well, I can't help myself. I told a friend of mine who lives in Washington State. I went to high school with him. We were both evangelicals at the same time, and he's emerged from it. He's still a person of faith, but we get along really well. We're close friends, and he's very worried about what just happened with this election. And I'm trying to be like humanistically hopeful without putting a rosy face on it. And he liked this analogy I came up with the other day. I looked around my room when I was talking to him, And I said, well, it's a little like, I remember when my daughter was a toddler and we had to kind of childproof the room. And she could go over and she'd pull books off of the shelves, right? Kids do that, little baby children do that, pulling books off the shelf, knocking things over. So you have to kind of childproof things a little bit. And my wife calls the MAGA Messiah, she calls him the child in chief. And I think in some ways, I mean, they're not children, and this is serious. They're serious adults doing some that could do some very serious damage to our democracy, and they're working on it. They're going to do a lot. But as I told my friend, I said, well, my daughter, she could pull the books off the shelves and think, but she couldn't pull the bookshelf over. That was solid. That was good and anchored. And other things were child-proofed enough to where nothing's gonna break, nothing's gonna fall over, and nothing big. And that, at least at that moment, don't ask me tomorrow, but at least at that moment, I could tell my friend, I could say, well, our democracy is going to stand. Our secular constitution is strong. And whatever they're going to throw at it, whatever stuff they're going to pull off the shelves and maybe burn some things or rip some things, make a mess, we're going to make it okay. And that's kind of how I think of Christian nationalism, Christian supremacy, is they're trying to do a lot of damage. It's going to keep going. But it's not just about the MAGA Messiah. It's about millions of people who have bought into an ideology that basically is not positive. It's not humanistic at all. It's not democratic. And it's not, as some of these people are saying, it's not fundamentally even Christian, at least in the sense of the Sermon on the Mount kind of Christian. My progressive work within Christianity for years, you know, we weren't going for political power. We were seeking how to help people and how to do unto others as we wanted them to do to us. How not to judge people and how to be inclusive and all those good things, the good side. But these folks are kind of the bad side. They're messing it all up, and we're going to have to do some cleanup along the way. But the more we can do to protect the wall that's I think is still solid, to separate religion from government, is not to keep religious people out of government. That's not the point. And they think that we're trying to do that, by the way. Christian nationalists, they say, well, you're trying to say that we can't, Christians can't be in government. No, that's not the point. That's not what separation of religion and state is all about. It's about, influencing, coloring the whole thing with your own ideology and beliefs, or imposing the Bible. The Bible is our new constitution. No, that ain't gonna work. So that's what I'll say about it. That ain't gonna work.
We now have a fifth question at the Friendly House, which I'll get to momentarily. But before I get to that, I'll say that we've had very spirited, interesting dialogue in the chat. Just in the interest of time, I don't have time to read it all. But those of you that haven't looked at the chat yet, there's some good things in there. I will read one thing, though, from Sheila Pastori. She writes, I just received a text as follows. Trump will abolish the Department of Education unless we fight back. And there's a link adding how we can fight back. So for those of you interested in that, take a look at the chat. And now let's go to question number 5 at the Friendly House.
Anne's question, I think she's talking about what is the frame our message. The Republicans are much better at it than we are. The one Republican I was tempted to vote for was Daddy Bush because of his 1,000 points of light. And look what's happened with MAGA. Make it great again? When was it not great? But anyway, what is our, to come up with a frame, it's so oversimplifying. So I'm trying to think what the Democrats or the progressives can say that will appeal, have the crowd appeal that MAGA has. And I don't know, I mean, it's not DEI, they hate that. I don't know if it's compassion, I don't know if it's inclusion, on with complexity, what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you on that. That's really hard. It's you know, you don't understand why people are falling for this message that's just not forward thinking at all. It's all thinking, well, let's go back to, they don't want to say it, do they? Nobody ever asks, you know, when was America great? And you know, it's going to go back to like the earlier gentleman's question, you know, the 1950s. And you know, let's go back to where, you know, whites were really in power and men were really in the leaders. And that's what they're looking for in a sense. So I don't know. I think the message has to be, well, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. I mean, why can't we be the ones who say, well, let's talk about patriotism. Let's talk about patriotism. You know, you all want to focus on nationalism, which is our, you know, America first, and we're the best country in the world, and all this kind of God blessed our country and all this stuff. You know, we can be the ones that say, well, that's not patriotism. You know, we can fly a flag too, and we can say, you know what that symbol means? It means we're all in this together. And it means democracy, and it means the secular constitution that we can live by. But that's, you know, it's hard to sell that message, I guess, because of too much nationalism. And, you know, whenever it's this in God we trust stuff or one nation under God, all that focus, to me, is a major distraction from being a true patriot, I guess. You know, being a person who says, well, I can love the country too. But one of my favorite quotes is from Pablo Casals, who was the great cellist. And he said, love of country is a wonderful thing, but why should love stop at the border? I love that. You know, it's kind of like, well, okay, you know, I mean, love your country. I love America. I love where I live. I love all that. But America's no better than any other country. Sure, we have part of our system and other things are really good. And I think that's probably better than a lot of other places. Okay. Well, why is that a problem to say, well, other countries, they love their countries too, other citizens, other places. So anyway, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but good question. I don't have the answer to that. I hope we can find better ways to communicate. Let's frame it this way. Let's find better ways and more inviting ways to frame our humanism and get the message out there. The good news of humanism, the gospel of humanism. I'm going to teach a class in the spring at one of the community colleges. I'm calling it the gospel of humanism. I might get 5 people. I don't know. But, you know, it's saying, well, what is the good news message that we have that's not exclusive? It's all the things it's not. But it's about inclusion. It's about being able to collaborate and work together. But it's not knocking people over the head with the Bible of atheism or some other thing. You know, it's saying, you know, if you're on the same page in terms of believing in the goodness of humanity and that we can all do better together, well, let's just do it. And I don't care what you believe. As Jefferson said, if you believe in 20 gods or no God, doesn't injure me. If you start trying to pick my pocket or break my leg, that'll be a problem.
I think that's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so much, Chris, for a thoughtful, enjoyable presentation with calls to action and such a spirited Q&A. I really enjoyed our hour and a half together today. Thank you so much.
Me too. Very much enjoyed it. Thank you for your welcome And great to be with you today, and all the best to Portland and the Pacific Northwest and my home area. I love it all.
Thank you.
Take good care.